Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to teach a class. I'm going to teach a class this week on the holiday of Shavuot. So Shavuot is upon us. Thursday night is the first night. Friday and Shabbos are the days outside of Israel of Shavuot. So we will not be reading, even if we had a synagogue to read it in, we would not be reading the Torah portion that came from last week. We're taking a little hiatus from reading the Torah portions, and we're reading all the readings that are pertinent to the holiday of Shavuos. So this class is going to give some wisdom and some teachings that I learnt about this holiday. So the holiday is called Shavuos, and I'm going to read you the source of it. It was in the Parsha called Emor as one of the sources. And it says, as you know, perhaps you know, we've been counting the days from the second day of Passover until Shavuos. We count those days. Every day is a different day, and every day is infused with a different energy that we use to help us work on ourselves. So in fact, the holidays of Passover and the holiday of Shavuos are connected to each other. So I'm going to read you the source for the holiday of Shavuos, and it's preceded by the commandment, by the mitzvah of counting the Omer. So you shall count for yourselves from the morrow of the rest day, so that's from the day after the first day of Passover, from the day when you bring the Omer of the waving. 7 weeks they shall be complete. Until the morrow of the 7th week you shall count 50 days, and you shall offer a new meal offering to Hashem. From your dwelling places you shall bring bread that shall be waved, 2 loaves made of 2 ephah. They shall be fine flour. They shall be baked, leavened, first offerings to Hashem. And then it goes on, talk a little bit more about the offerings. There shall be a holy convocation for yourselves. You shall do no laborious work. It is an eternal decree in your dwelling places for your generations. That's one of our sources for the holiday of Shavuos. It doesn't tell us to have the holiday of Shavuos on the 6th day of Sivan, which is the month we're in now, and Thursday night, Friday, it will be the 6th day of Sivan. We're not taught that the holiday falls on the 6th day of the 3rd month. We're taught that it's 50 days after the 2nd day of Passover. So it's something that is linked to Passover. So we don't always think about that. Sometimes we think, well, there's Passover, and then there's sort of this period in between. Some people know about counting these days, and some people don't. But we know about the holiday in between Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, where we light our bonfires and we celebrate different reasons why we celebrate. We talked about that before. And then we head into coming up to this holiday of Shavuos, and it is mostly known as the day when God gave us the Torah, where it's the giving of the Torah, Matan Torah. Matan means a gift, so God gifted us the Torah. But I really want to speak about what it is that we're supposed to do. It's not to think about how it is that they're connected. Why is Passover connected to Shavuos? And the answer is that it's very mystical. You know, if you think about the fact that what was Passover? Passover was a huge revelation of God to the Jewish people who were enslaved in Egypt. We were mired in slavery. We were constrained. We couldn't think for ourselves. We had no capacity. We were so distracted with all our work and all our fears and all the slavery and all the harsh labor that we had to do, that there wasn't time for the Jewish people to actualize themselves, to think about God, to think about who they were as a people. They were just too busy taking care of their everyday needs and making sure that they were doing what they needed to do in their enslavement, and so then they were freed. You know, literally God, and we have this idea of God lifting us out like an eagle. We're on the back of an eagle, this mother eagle who's carrying her children on her back. Eagles apparently carry their young on their back. So we have this imagery of God, almost like a what do you call it, a magic carpet, and the magic eagle, like the God sort of literally pulling us out, bringing us out, one nation from within another, and extracting us. So we've read all about the Jewish plague, about the plagues in Egypt. We've been through all of that, and now we're coming out. Pharaoh is kicking us out. The Pharaoh to whom the Jewish people cried. We cried to Pharaoh. Pharaoh was our master. He was the one who was, in charge of our destiny, so to speak, and giving us more and more and more labor. And we cried out to him that we couldn't do the work. And what does he do? He makes the work harder. He says, you can't even make the bricks out of the straw I'm not going to give you the straw anymore. Now you have to get your own straw. So not only when they cried out to Pharaoh were they met with resistance, they were met with even harsher labor. Now you have to even make the same quota of bricks, but now you have to go out and get your own straw. So there was even more measures of hardship that the Jewish people endured when they cried out to Pharaoh. And they get plucked out, like this imagery of the eagle on the back of the eagle, the mother eagle, bringing us out, God bringing us out. We had this whole being inside the Paschal lamb, smearing our doorposts with blood. We're being born. We're coming through those doorways. We're coming through the Reed Sea that split for us, the Red Sea that split for us, and we come out into the desert. And we followed God into the desert. We had so much faith that God was going to take care of us. And what do? We start crying out again. Different kind of crying out, right? We're crying out to Pharaoh, makes our work harder. He has his quota. We are a tool that is needed to create his egotistical pyramids or whatever he was building for his own aggrandizement, and we're just a pawn in that picture. And now we're out in the desert, and we're crying to God, give us food, give us quail, give us water. And God takes care of us. He gives us manna from heaven. He gives us water out of a rock. He gives us quail that flow in, and that has some complications to it. But the point is that when we cry out to God, God's listening to us, and he's compassionate, and he's loving, and he's taking care of us, and he's looking after us, and he's protecting us with the clouds of glory that surround us, with the pillar of fire that leads us. That we have a destination. We're brought out. It's a gift that we've been redeemed. We're coming to Mount Sinai, and it takes us 49 days to get to Mount Sinai. Those are the 49 days that we're counting. So what happened before? When we were in Egypt, it says that we sank to this really low place, like our ability to think transcendently, to be spiritual people was so squashed down. It says we were at the 49th level, the 49th descent down. And when God brought us out, there's a teaching, a Kabbalistic teaching, that he brought us back to almost like zero. So when he came out of Egypt, we're now starting at ground zero. Now we have to build ourselves up, because we're going to get to Mount Sinai 49 days later, 50 days later. We're going to count those 7 times 7 weeks, which we've just been counting, which is going to end on the 50th day, which will be this Thursday. We've been counting every single day. And every single day is 7 times 7. We're counting 7 days of every week. And each, we have these character traits, Kabbalistic character traits of kindness, of compassion, of what's our foundation, or different aspects of who we are, justice and judgment and all these different aspects of who we are. And each day we work on one of those character traits in all of its dimensions, in all of its manifestations. If we really did this work properly, every single day, step by step, we count the day. It's not just counting a day. This is the first day. This is the second day. It's not just a counting of days. It's a focus on self. It's a self-reflection. It's an ability for us to go from ground zero to building ourselves up in such a way that we're going to be the perfect receptacles for the divine wisdom that God wants to pour into the world. God created the world to give goodness to the world, to give us goodness. And obviously with Adam and Eve, there was mistakes that they made in the Garden of Eden. We were expelled from the Garden of Eden, and we're trying to get back there. We're trying to get to a place where we recognize the oneness of God. We recognize that we can receive this bounty, this blessing, all this wonderment that God wants to give people, give us. And we working to do that. So these 49 days between Passover, the second day of Passover, and Shavuot, which is coming up Thursday night, are days of working on ourselves, of self-reflection and of working ourselves. There's so many times in the Jewish calendar where we're like working on ourselves because there's a lot of work to do. We're human beings. We're not angels. So we're working our way to Mount Sinai. We get to Mount Sinai 49 days after we left Egypt, and we spring into that 50th day. We talked before about 7 being the natural order. We have 6 days of the week, 7 days Shabbat, 6 years of working the land, 7th day Shemitah year. We've talked about this before. But when you go into the 8th day, when you go into the 50th day, 7 times 7, 49, 50 Jubilee year, we talked about that. When you go into that 8th dimension, you're going into a transcendent world, whatever that means. It's going beyond the norm, beyond the natural. And at that point, the Jewish people, at that point, back then, after the Exodus from Egypt, the people were, it says, they were like one man with one heart. They were so united. They recognized the oneness of the universe. They recognized the oneness of the people, that we are all created in the image of God, and that we're all a crucial piece in the puzzle. We talked last week in the Torah reading called Bamidbar. We talked about the way in which the Jewish people are encamped around the Mishkan, around the tabernacle. And each tribe had their flag. Each tribe had their breastplate color that was on the Kohen Gadol. They had a certain color. They had a flag. They had a symbol. They had a character. They had their specific energy to bring into the world. Each one as important as the other. Each one equal. Each one around the tabernacle. No one in any better position than anyone else. Everyone doing their part. No jealousy, no anger. And that's how it was when the Jewish people reached Mount Sinai. They had 3 days to prepare. They've had their 49 days of traveling and working on themselves and getting to that place and understanding God's taking care of them, trying to get to the spiritual height of what was expected of them. So they are the complete and perfect and wholesome receptacle to receive the Torah. And it says that when we came to Mount Sinai, that we had to prepare for 3 days. So we had to separate from the mountain. We had to, kind of create that boundary. There's a boundary. We weren't allowed to touch the mountain. It was a very low, by the way, it was a very low mountain. Probably everybody knows that Mount Sinai was not the Alps. It was not this big Everest mountain. It was a tiny, tiny mountain. It was the symbol of humility. The mountain that symbolized humility was the most humble of mountains. And just to kind of keep with that thought, the idea is that God is able to access the world when there's humility, access us when we're humble, when we're full of ourselves, when our ego fills us up, and ego is the I that is all pervasive. There's no room for God. And it says actually that a person who gets angry has no place for God because it's about me. There's a meanness, there's an I-ness there that pushes God out. So even in the character trait of anger, there isn't even a middle road for that. You're not supposed to ever be angry. So we'll work on that. But the idea is that we've worked on ourselves. We worked on all these different character traits. We have, the seven character traits to work on, and we could talk about that another time. And by the time the Jewish people got to the Mount Sinai, they were ready. They were perfectly one with each other. They were ready. They were perfect receptacles to receive the divine wisdom. Moses goes up onto the mountain. He goes onto the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and he comes back with the Torah, right? He comes back with the 10 commandments. He comes back with the luchos, with these 2 tablets of stone on which is engraved the law, that God, the wisdom, the guide for our lives. And Moses comes down with that, and he sees the people at that point. This is not Shavuos, but he sees the people dancing. They've already miscalculated when Moses is going to come down, and they've miscalculated. They started with the golden calf, and the luchos, the tablets, are smashed onto the ground, and that's the end of those luchos. They're gone. And Moses has to go back up the mountain. So it's very interesting that we celebrate this 50th day. God says in the Torah that we celebrate this 50th day. It's a day of Matan Torah, of God gifting us the Torah. And yet it's also the day that the Torah was smashed, that Moses took however you understand it. There's a teaching, really crazy teaching, that the letters that were on the tablets, when the golden calf debacle was happening and Moses is coming down, that the letters left the stone, that they flew up. They couldn't exist in the world when the people had this idolatrous experience going on, that the wisdom that was in the tablets couldn't stay there, and the wisdom floated back up to heaven, and the stones became so heavy that Moses wasn't able to carry them more, and they fell. So there's one interpretation that he threw them down out of disappointment and anger, and there's another teaching that says that the letters left and the stones became so heavy that Moses couldn't carry them anymore, and they were smashed. But what's interesting is this is the day that we celebrate as the Matan Torah, is the day that God gifted us Matan. He gave us this as a gift. He gave us the Torah as a gift. When Moses comes back down the second time with the second iteration of the tablets, it's one that Moses himself wrote. And that was on Yom Kippur. That's when God forgave us for the sin of the golden calf. We're not celebrating the Matan Torah back then. We're celebrating it on the 6th of Sivan, which is very interesting. And one of the answers given to why we do that is because of the state that the Jewish people were in. We were in a state of oneness. We, at that point, were ready and able to receive all that God wanted to give. And we learn when God gave the Torah that there were two of the utterances. We translated it as the 10 commandments, but it's really the 10 sayings, the dibros, the 10 sayings, that God said 10 things. And it also says that he said it all at once, that we who are defined by time and space, we have to have everything sequential. We have to have everything in a place. God is outside of time and place. So all of the commands are given actually all in that first letter, in that first word, Anochi, I am Hashem your God. But however, the first commandment God gave to all the Jewish people had a revelation of God at Mount Sinai. And we'll talk about why it's he. I want to talk about that. God, as a giver, masculine energy, God the giver, gives Torah wisdom to the Jewish people standing at Sinai, perfectly united, ready to receive the Torah. After their 49 days of working on themselves, they've separated from the mountain, they've separated sexually from each other, they've created a boundary around the mountain, and they are right back almost like they were in Gan Eden, like in the Garden of Eden, where God and Adam had a face-to-face, had a very intimate relationship with each other. Adam at that point was more soul than body. The Jewish people at Mount Sinai were able to perceive God, whatever that means. And they had a revelation, and God says, I am Hashem your God. God describes himself as, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God who created the heavens and the earth. I'm the Lord your God who created you. I'm the Lord your God. All of those things is not how God describes himself in the first of the 10 commandments. In the first of the 10 commandments, God says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Testifying, you saw it, you experienced it, you Jewish people who I am interacting with right now, you saw me at Sinai. You experienced me bringing you out from Egypt. You experienced that. So you know it. It's not a faith jump, a leap of faith. It's not like, okay, I believe you created the world. Wasn't there when you created the world, so I believe it. Leap of faith, perhaps. It's I, the Jewish people standing at Sinai, experienced you, God, bringing us out of Egypt, and God's describing himself, introducing himself to the Jewish people as the God who redeemed them from Egypt. And I think that's a really important thing because now through those generations, we continue to receive that wisdom that was given to our ancestors at Sinai. It says all the Jewish souls that ever were to be ever, all the souls of future converts in the future, and this is very, I believe, very comforting to people I've spoken to who have converted to Judaism, to know this teaching, that their souls were also at Sinai. Their souls were sort of put into the world in different places, and they had to come back, and they came back to the Jewish people, and they came back to where they belong, so to speak, because that's their soul. Their soul belongs in the camp with the Jewish people. And all of those souls through future generations, wherever you are scattered all over the world, wherever you were, those souls were all at Sinai, and they all received this divine revelation. The first of the 10 commandments are, I am Hashem, your God. And apparently there's a medrash that teaches that this is really fantastic, I love this, when God gave the Torah, that when he said that first of the 10 utterances, the 10 commandments, I am Lord your God, that the world was perfused, if that's the right word, with a sweet smelling fragrance. There was a amazingly pleasant, beautiful fragrance that permeated throughout the whole world. And the people smelled it and they were filled with that smell. So it's interesting because they ask, why is smell? Why did it come? And we know there were other things that went on. There was fire and lightning and thunder and all sorts of things, but there was also a smell. And if you go back to the Garden of Eden story, that the one sense that was not involved in the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the one sense that was unsullied was the sense of smell. There was taste, there was sight, there was all the other hearing, there were all sorts of ways in which the other senses that we have were part of the sin of the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and smell was not one of them. And actually that's one of the reasons why we smell after Shabbat, because it revives us. That's a smell. The sense of smell is very holy and pure because it was unsullied at the time of this in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve ate from that tree. And so we start the rectification, we start the coming together, we start the learning how to be from a place of unsulliedness, from a place of perfection. And the sense of smell is something that, and it's very interesting. Here we are in Corona where people lose that. That's what they lose first. I don't know how that ties in, but it's very interesting because smell is a smell that Kabbalistically is pure and is untainted and so when God gave that first of the 10 Commandments to the Jewish people, the whole Jewish people heard it. They also smelled it. They also inhaled it. There was something beautiful about the smell, and then it went away, and then it came back for the second one. We learned before how the experience of having that revelation of God was so powerful that the neshama, the soul of each individual, lost its tether to their body, and they essentially died. They were brought back to life, and then they heard the second one. They smelled the smell. They had this experience. Their soul left them, and then they say, "We can't take this anymore. Moses, you go get the rest." And he goes back up the mountain, and then we have the rest of that story. But the first two of the Aseres Adibros of the 10 Commandments were given to God Himself, by God Himself, to all the Jewish people, all of us standing there, every single person, as one person with one heart. And I think there's something else I want to add to this, which is that this idea of being that we were like one person with one heart. So traditionally, we understand that to mean that we were a community that was united. We loved each other. We understood each other. We were not angry with each other. We embraced each other. We respected and valued each other. It was perfect unity amongst the people. But I learned something else, and I actually can't source it. I'm sorry. But there's another idea that not only were we perfect unity as a people, but our own individuality, that each one of us had reached a wholesomeness. Each one of us, and it says in the Medrash that if anybody was blind or deaf or lame or had any physical ailments, they were healed. That in body they were healed. There was no blemish. There was no ailments. There was nothing ill or sick about anybody. Everybody was physically healthy, and everybody was emotionally and psychologically healthy, which sounds almost impossible in our day and age, but that's the idea, that they had the opportunity and they were gifted the ability to be wholesome into themselves. And I think one of the things that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about lately is the idea of being whole emotionally and psychologically, and the ability that we need to have, which is to experience the plethora, the whole gamut of emotions that we have. Many people, most people that I talk to, are experiencing loss of some sort during the pandemic, where little losses, like I can't go get my nails done, if you're a person that likes to get your nails done, and that's a loss of not being able to do that, or losses of loved ones, losses of jobs, losses of income, losses of having control, everything. So many losses, from what appear to be small to the very big, but all losses nonetheless. And if we don't somehow feel them and experience them, then we kind of lock away that emotional part of ourselves. And we don't let it express ourselves, like I shouldn't feel sad about that, or I shouldn't feel bad about that. And perhaps one of the teachings that we're learning here is that in order to be whole, in order to be wholesome, We have to feel all our emotions. We have to experience them. We have to let them have their day, so to speak, so that we can be emotionally and healthy and whole. Interestingly, if you look at the Jewish calendar, we have every emotional experience in the calendar year. If you Tisha B'Av, the day of the destruction of the temple, the day the spies came back with a bad report and the people cried, there was crying, there was mourning. We have mourning and crying built into our calendar. We have Purim with joy and simcha built into our system, and everything in between. So there are times, and as Koheles, King Solomon teaches us, there's a time for everything. And I'm proposing that in order to be whole, we have to feel all the emotions that we are blessed to be able to feel, and not push them away and say they don't belong, or they're not real, or I can't give in to them. Perhaps I'll throw this out as a proposition that if we allow ourselves to feel that loss, then we'll be more emotionally whole. And the goal of this whole period of going from the second day of Passover to Shavuos is to work on ourselves so that we become whole people, so that we are the vessels that can receive the Torah. We talk about God as giving the Torah as a gift. Here, I'm giving it to you, but we also have to be able to receive it. I mean, we also have to understand it, and we have to let it kind of percolate us. Very interestingly, it says that when God gave the Torah, that he gave it to the women first. Gave it to the women first. So we can talk about that for a little bit, but it gets back to the notion of why it is that we talk about God as he, like God gave the Torah. And I'd like to propose a way to look at it that it seems to me to make a lot of sense. It's Kabbalistically based, but basically if you talk about male energy and female energy in the universe, not man and woman, not like, God is a man or God is a woman, but that there are in the world, built into the world, what we call male energy and what we call female energy. And the male energy is the energy of potential, of giving, of inspiration, of kind of putting the flow into the world, right? So when God created the world, he created the world with male energy, right? When we like even in the male anatomy, the male is the one that sort of puts the seed into the universe, like lots and lots of, like in a flash, there's like all this millions and millions of seed that come from the male. And what does the feminine do? The feminine energy is an energy of taking that spirituality, it's taking that inspiration, taking that energy and nurturing it and housing it and watering it, so to speak, and allowing it to manifest tangibly into the world. So if you take the mashal, or the analogy, or the male female in our world, the male is this, pushing the seed into out, and the woman receives it, and the woman grows it, and it nurtures it and gives it what it needs and creates the home for it, so that what then comes hopefully from that is a new reality, a baby, a new creation, something that has been taken from potential to actualization, The man is the potential, the male, the he energy is potential, and the female is the nurturer, is the conduit by which it goes from potential to actualization. That's the way the Kabbalists understand male energy and female energy. So when we talk about use the pronoun he, it's he, the giver. We also talk about she, the energy of Shechina, the energy of Shabbat, the energy of holding, the energy of allowing something just to be. That's feminine energy, because it's the consolidation, it's the taking it from potential to actual. So male and female, right? So if we talk about God giving the Torah, God as the male energy giving Torah, wanting to flood the world with Torah, there has to be a receptacle for it. Go back to the Garden of Eden we talked about, and it says, God says it's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for there to be potential that doesn't have a way to be actualized. It's half the story. Half the story if there isn't a way for the potential to be actualized. If there isn't a way for God to infuse the world with with the spirituality that he wants to put in the world, if there aren't receptacles to receive it and actualize it, then we're half the story. So the Jewish people become sort of the receivers of that Torah. It says God gives it to us, but we also have to be receptacles who can receive it. We can learn Torah. We can know Torah. We can learn it to know it, but it has to be that we then put it back out into the world, right? We're not Jewish people who sit on mountaintops and meditate and pontificate and just let the divine energy flow in. Our mission, our job as a people is to take that energy that God wants to put in the world, take the spirituality, take all that potential and actualize it. I think somewhere, Winston Churchill's quoted as saying, the Jews are the conscience of the world. I don't know if that's true or not, but the idea that the Torah is the source for the wisdom that the Jewish people have to, on some level, cling to bring into the world. I wanted to bring it into the world. So let's keep going with that idea. So the Jewish people were ready, so to speak, and it says in many different Kabbalistic sources that to marry God, that we became, so to speak, in a covenantal relationship with God, like a wedding. So in a wedding, you have, there's money, there's exchange of money. Where's the money in this story? The money in this story, in our experience, is when the Egyptians come, and they come with all their wealth, and the Jewish people have some of that wealth, and the Egyptians get consumed by the Red Sea, and what comes onto the banks of the seashore is all the jewels that were on their chariots and on their horses and all the wealth that they had. And we picked up, that was the money that we picked up, is the money of this betrothal one. What's the ketubah? What's the contract? Is the Torah, is the Jewish wisdom, is the divine wisdom that God's giving to the Jewish people to hold and to actualize and to bring it out and manifest it, like a woman does when she, brings a baby into the world. We're bringing out that potential into actual. And what's the third thing? Oh, the third thing is you consummate a marriage. So what's that? There's an intimacy. There's a connection that the Jewish people had with God. When he revealed himself to us, there was this intimate relationship that we had with God. And it actually, there's a Gemara, I think, in the Talmud. It says that when the Jewish people were receiving the Torah, God literally picked up the mountain. The Mount Sinai. I know it was only a little mountain, but he picked it up and he held it over the Jewish people, and he said, if you don't accept the Torah, I'm going to drop the mountain on your head, so you're going to die, right? So either take the Torah or die. So they said, okay, we'll take the Torah. But the teaching that the mountain was held up over their heads, very, very interesting teaching, that we're standing under the mountain. Actually, that is one of the sources for a chuppah. I never knew that before. I learned that this week, that one of the sources for a chuppah at a wedding is God holding the mountain over our heads and saying, either you accept the Torah now, or I'll drop the mountain on you, and that'll be the end of you. So we were coerced into taking it on some level. Yes, we understood God was taking care of us, and yes, we worked on ourselves, and yes, we were the vessel, and it's always both sides, always a paradox. We were, quote unquote, forced into it. So there we are. We're at Mount Sinai. We're receiving the Torah. So I want to read you something else that I thought was really fantastic. And it says that the tablets, then when Moses comes down with the two tablets, that it says in the Medrash, here I'll read this to you. The tablets were 6 tefachim long, so that's a measurement like a handbreadth. The tablets were 6 tefachim long. In some sense, God grasped 2 tefachim, Moses grasped 2 tefachim, and there were 2 tefachim that bridged the gap between them. And there's a Torah commentary called the Shem Shmuel, and he continues with this thinking, and he says, what was that talking about? So what does God have control of? And the idea is that God is grasping 2 of the tefachim. What are the 2 tefachim that God's holding? God is holding thoughts, our thoughts. And thoughts come into our minds, and we don't actually know sometimes where those thoughts are coming from. One of the explanations why things happen, or why did I go there, or why did I do that, or why did I, all of a sudden I thought about that, or all of a sudden I had that idea. Where did those thoughts come from? God gives us those thoughts. That God is seeding into our minds thoughts. Not that we don't have control over some of our thoughts, but but for the sake of this teaching, perhaps maybe go with the idea, and I think it's true. There are many times where we just don't know where that thought comes from. It came from somewhere. Like, I had a thought to help this person. I had a thought to call that person. I had a thought. Where did those come from? It says God's in control of those thoughts. So God's in control of thoughts. We're in control of our actions. Right? What I do is under my control. And the link in between the two, the bridge of the two, is our speech, is the speech. So in order to, again, it's sort of like the idea of starting from a place that we're in control of. We're in control of our actions. So let's work on our actions. And if we work on our actions, it'll permeate into our speech and then into our thoughts. But we start with our actions. So when God came to the Jewish people and he says the Medrash, will you, Jewish people, accept my Torah? And we said, what's in it? No, we didn't say what's in it. And other nations apparently said what's in it. We didn't say what's in it. There's a joke about that. We said, well, how much is it? And he said it's free. I said, we'll take 2. Joke. The Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma. They said, we'll do it and then we'll learn about it. We'll do it first. Action first. When a bride and groom, when people get married, when 2 partners get married, the common commitment mantra is, will you accept this person as your, I do. Like it's sort of in our lingo to say, my commitment to you is I'll do. So the doing is fundamental. Action is fundamental. And then hopefully it'll lead to, us being in more control of our everything else, our speech and then our thoughts. But it starts with action. So we just had an interesting class with Dr. Caroline Stanley. It's on my Core Connects RI website. But she talked about how to affect change, how to change ourselves, how to tweak a character trait, how to become more something. If you want to be more, let's say you want to be more caring or you want to be more patient, like something you can work on. How do you do that? And she suggested what you do is you imagine someone in your world that who manifests that character trait better than you, or that you think of when you think, oh, I want to be like that person because that person's more caring, that person's more patient, that person's more whatever it is. And then you imagine yourself being that person and then you act that way. Like through your actions, through role-playing that person, you will change yourself. And is it fake it till you make it? But the action is a very fundamental starting point for changing ourselves. So when we go through our 49 days of Sphira, we're going through this polishing. Sphira is like polishing. We're like shining ourselves up. We're trying to kind of like build ourselves, work on ourselves, be more caring, be more kind. All of these things we're working on is by doing first. Like we might in our thoughts and our speech, but it starts with action. And that's perhaps what it says when it says this medrash, when it talks about the 6 tfachim, that the Torah is made up of 6 actions, speech, and thought. So God's in control of thought, we're in control of our actions, and we want to bridge that, start with action. So I think that's what that teaching is. So I think that's really a good tool for us to work on ourselves, to be able to be that receptacle who's ready and willing and able to receive the divine wisdom. And again, it's not just to know, it's not just to learn in order to know. So obviously there's a lot of people who love to learn Torah, love to learn divine wisdom, myself included. I heard someone say that, we're all into book clubs nowadays. I don't know if maybe being on Zoom more often, book groups. But if you think about it, the Torah and learning Torah is like the biggest book group ever. and it transcends time and space, right? We're reading sources that go back generations and generations, and we're learning from people who live in all sorts of different countries and different places. So our Torah is really unbounded by time and space. It's a transcendent wisdom. It's a wisdom that comes from outside of mankind, outside of ourselves. So if we buy that, then there's so much to learn, there's so much to acquire, but it's not just about learning for intellectual sake, it's learning so that I become that. If you go back to the idea of going from Pesach, where I was in a low spiritual state, where I could work myself up so I could be in a humble and an open place to get this wisdom, not just so that I've got the wisdom, but so that I live that wisdom and it becomes me and it becomes a conduit by which we fulfill the mission that Jewish people had, right back to that Sinai experience when God says, I'm marrying you, you're marrying me, we're married together. You know, whether it's forced or whether it's done out of our own volition, but the point is that we are in a covenantal relationship where we are like the receiving the Torah in order to be able to flow it back out into the world. Like that's the point, is to flow it back into the world, not to hold it and just have it for ourselves, but to share it and to be it and to live it and to work on it and to keep growing and keep moving and try work on ourselves to be better and better and better and better, better and better, and not with any shame or not with any guilt, but just to keep working. And I'm human and I'm do the best I can, and I'll keep moving and keep moving. And it sort of all pulls back together. So then we can smell the roses. Then we can smell the smells of the world, of God giving us the Torah. Like there's a smell that's there. There's a spiritual antennae that we don't have because we're distracted and we're running and we're doing, and maybe we're not running and doing, and maybe we can like open ourselves up. Maybe we can work on squashing down that ego. And if you go to the first of the Ten Commandments, Hashem says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. It starts with the letter Aleph. And the letter Aleph is an amazing letter. If you see it in the Hebrew language, it's like a little mark on the top and a little mark on the bottom, and then it has a line that goes across. So actually, it's if you look at it, it's a yud, which is a letter, and a yud on the bottom, and then a vav across. So it's a vav is a hook. So we're taking the yud, which is godliness in the upper worlds, and we have the yud in the lower worlds, which is us, and we're linking them together. So the Aleph, which is the beginning of the Ten Commandments, and it starts with the letter Aleph, is all in that word, in that letter, is our mission, is to take the spirituality from up there, and with our hook, with our Torah, with our learning, with our knowing, with our actions, with our speech, with our thoughts, bring it down into this world and actualize it. Be like that feminine energy, actualizing it. So when we get through, we talked about 6 and 7, when we get through the 6th millennium and we get to that 7th millennium, we'll just be. That's the end. That's the end of it. We've done our work. We've done the best we can, and our work is finished. But we're still working right now. So I spoke to you a little bit before at the beginning about the idea of us crying out to God, and that God gave us food, gave us food, and he gave us water, and he gave us quail, right? But he gave us manna. So manna, the amount of manna that God gave us every day was an omer, because we call this period counting from Passover to Shavuos, counting of the omer, and the omer was this barley offering that we gave on the second day of Passover. And so every day we say it's like one more day of the omer. The omer was also the amount of manna that God gave us in the desert. And if we collected too much or more, it went back to an omer. If we collected not enough, then it would build up to an omer. It was miraculous food. We lived in a miraculous realm in that desert where God was supplying an omer. This is what you need as an omer. You don't need more, and you don't need less, you need exactly an omer. And that was a barley offering back in Passover. And then when we get to Shavuos, what are we bringing? I read it out at the beginning of the class. We're bringing bread. We're bringing chametz. We're bringing wheat. We're bringing more human food, right? Barley is an animal food. Wheat is made into bread, is a human food. And we're transitioning from animal to human. We're going from just taking care of our basic needs, and we're moving into a place where we can self-actualize. We're going to go to the top of Maslow's hierarchy, triangle of hierarchy, and we're going to try to actualize ourselves. We don't have to worry while we're in the desert for the basic needs, for shelter and for security and for food and water. All that's taken care of. We're working on actualizing ourselves. So we're moving from the animalistic Omer offering that we did on the beginning of Passover to the offering of bread, where we bring bread. And bread, we've talked before, is a combination of man and God. God gives you the raw ingredients. He gives you the wheat and the water and the yeast and the oil and the sugar, gives you everything you need, and you with your wisdom, with your energy, with your intention, make bread. And then what do we do with the bread? We don't keep it, we share it. We share it, we keep it, we keep some, we have some, and then we share it. So go back to the beginning when we talked about God creating the world to give blessing, creator, man, creator, God, creator, creating in order to give. Then we, to be God-like, also have to give. So the foundation of Torah, I think everybody would agree, is kindness and compassion. Kindness and compassion is the foundation of Torah. And that's how the world was created. That's how it was when we were brought out of Egypt. That's how it was when we were at Sinai. And hopefully it continues into our generation, into the future. Kindness and compassion as the foundation for Torah. And peace. In order to receive the Torah, we had to be at peace. So that talked about the oneness of the Jewish people. We were a peaceful people. We weren't fighting with each other. We weren't angry with each other. But I also wanted to really extrapolate that out into the peaceful wholesomeness of our own individual, like each man is a world. It says each man is a world unto ourselves. Like each one of us is complicated and layered and has all kinds of experience that make us who we are at this moment and who we will be in the future. And yet we can work on ourselves, and yet we can be whole. Try to work towards wholesomeness through experiencing our emotions, through working on our actions, through going through the 49 steps of this polishing period between Pesach and Shavuot. There's a lot of work to do to work on ourselves, to shine ourselves up so that we can be that receptacle, so that we can hold it and then give it back out, break free. Okay, so learning Torah obviously isn't just intellectual. It's in order to experience it and to put it out into the world. But I want to suggest a couple of other reasons why we would learn Torah. That learning Torah, learning divine wisdom, understanding a lot of whatever it is that you're gravitate towards, whether it's Jewish law or it's Jewish theology or philosophy, or there's so much to learn. We'll never get to the end of it. But that we learn about ourselves through it. What do I gravitate towards? What do I like to learn? What is it that rocks my boat? What is it that gives me passion? What lessons really gravitate towards me? Like some people say, I love to learn about Jewish law. I prefer to learn the esoteric things, the Kabbalistic things, the more transcendent things. Those things really exciting because it feels like so much more to this world than what I can see and I can touch, and yet there is so much more going on, and we don't know. We don't have the olfactory sense that we need to actually smell. They say that when the Messiah comes, that those people who are really, really spiritually attuned, they can stick their head out the window and they can smell the Mashiach. They smell whether God's here, whether the Messiah is here or not. Anyway, so it's a mirror. It's a mirror to ourselves. Another idea is that when we pray, that's us talking to God, also talking to ourselves, but us talking to God. And when we learn the wisdom of the Torah, that's God talking to us. So we learn about God. We can learn about God, obviously, from nature, and we talked about that, the flowers and the mountains and the this and the beauty and the amazing intricateness of our world. And even just look at an orange, how crazy amazing an orange is, or the human body, etc., etc. But also that we can learn about God by learning His Torah, understanding God through that. So that's a way to come to understand God and to love God and to know God. So that's the second reason to learn Torah. Third reason to learn Torah is for us to align ourselves with values that are above mankind. So the values, the Torah values for how to live our lives might be hard for us to do on our own. We might come up with them, or some of them we wouldn't come up with, but we might not come up with them. They might not be ones that were so easy to do. Like, for instance, there's a mitzvah, there's a Torah directive to return a lost object. And it is absolutely amazing the lengths and breadths that people go to return lost objects. Whereas it's possible that a person otherwise, I don't know, but otherwise might say, oh, I found this object, I don't see anybody here, so I'll just keep it. That might be an inclination we all have. Myself included. I found $10 on the street. Great, fantastic, it's mine. Or you could say, oh, I better put a sign up, who lost the $10? Or who lost? There was a story about a rabbi in Connecticut who bought a desk from an old lady who didn't want her desk anymore, and he bought this desk, and he took it out of her house, and he couldn't get it into his house. He had to literally take it apart to put it into his house. As he took it apart, he found it in the back, tucked in the back behind a drawer or something. I don't know how it was positioned, but he found a bag, and inside this bag was like $40,000 in cash. And he went back to the lady and he said, I bought the desk, but I didn't buy the money. So I'm giving you the money back. And obviously this made newspaper. It was a big deal. He says, I'm just following the Torah. I have to return it. I didn't buy that. There's a story, and I think there's a story in our tradition of a man who bought a donkey, and in the saddle of the donkey was a jewel, and he gave the jewel back to the man who sold him the donkey, and the man was flabbergasted. Like, why are you giving? Like, unbelievable. It's above and beyond. Like, I wouldn't have expected you do that. And the response of the seller of the donkey was, Baruch Hashem. Like, you who represent God have gone above and beyond what I could imagine any other person would have done, and I applaud you for that, and I give credence, or I give recognition to your God that directed you to do that. So I don't know if that's the right answer or not, but it is an answer. And I would even say, in this day and age where we're dealing with a lot of end-of-life issues and so on, that there are secular values and there are values of end of life and so on that are different coming out of a Torah perspective than would be coming out from the secular ethic. So in order to understand what the Torah would tell us to do in certain situations, you have to learn the Torah. So that would be a way to line yourself up with the values that come out of this compendium of divine wisdom, is to live a moral life and learn the rules of how to connect yourself back to this divine source of everything. Like, we're all coming back. So the last idea, as we get to the end of this shir, is the idea of our neshama. And like I mentioned before, there's an idea that we were all the neshamas, all the souls of every Jew ever in the whole world ever. It converts everybody, even people who quote unquote convert out. All those souls were present at Sinai. There's an idea of our neshama being a receptacle that received all of that Torah, and that the Torah is inside of us. That we all have a recognition of this wisdom that's inside of us. There's another story, medrash, that's given about how a baby in utero is accompanied by an angel. And there's an angel in utero with the developing fetus who's teaching this baby all of the wisdom of the Torah. It's all being given to this baby. The baby learns everything there is to know, the whole wisdom of the universe. And then when the baby is born, then the angel flicks the baby at this point here, and I think it's called a philtrum, that point there, and all the Torah goes inside. It's not lost, it just goes deep inside. And that our journey through life is to expose it, to manifest it, to relearn it. We have it, we know it. Like, I don't know how you feel, but when I was a little child, I had a very definitive, strong sense that there was God in the world. I lost it as I got older, and then tried to reclaim it again. But as a little child, I used to talk to God. My parents didn't talk that way, but somehow it was there. I don't know how many of you would relate to that, but I think that it's an interesting idea to think about, that the wisdom that we have is inside of us. And there's a lot of stories in our tradition that talk about knowing things without being taught something. So it's really interesting that if you go to our Pesach, our Passover Haggadah. And I'm gonna, we have the Dayenu, we have this Dayenu thing, and we go through all these different things. If God had done this and not done that, it would have been enough. Dayenu. So there's one that always struck me as odd, and it says, if God had brought us before Mount Sinai, but not given us the Torah, Dayenu would have been enough. If he brought us to Sinai, didn't give us the Torah, it would have been enough. How is that possible? Like, isn't it all about knowing the Torah? Like, we need to know the Torah in order to do the Torah, in order to be the Torah, in order to have that relationship, we need to be given the wisdom. And one of the ways I heard that interpreted is to say that actually, if we're able to kind of open ourselves up and take away all the things that are blocking us, that we will access the Torah. And the first person to do that in Jewish history was Abraham. And Abraham, without, like, it's years before the Torah was given, right? And he was already eating matzah on Passover and doing things that were not given yet to the Jewish people as a whole. But as an individual, he understood the universe so well that he knew that had to be done. He knew he had to eat matzah at that time. He knew he had to welcome guests. He knew, like, a lot of different things that he understood about the world that he couldn't have known like, how did he know it? So that harps back to this idea that it's inside of us. If we can access it, if we can somehow reveal it, that we don't need it from outside because it's inside, but we can't do that, so we need it from outside. But then sometimes we go, well, I knew that, or that makes sense, or yeah, because it's just relearning it. It's just coming back to what we already know. I think that's a pretty amazing idea. That we know it already. It's inside of us, and sort of the revelation of God at Mount Sinai to give us this Torah wisdom is also, as we now enter into this period, Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, where we re-accepting the Torah, so to speak. We're re-acknowledging that we have our own Torah inside of us, and that we can expose that, we can kind of reconnect to it, and we can also recommit to working on ourselves, working on learning more in order to know more, in order for it to be part of us that manifests itself out. So as we go from Passover, so to say that Passover was a moment of inspiration, it was a moment of God like giving us this freedom. God the giver, God the he energy in the world, bringing us into the desert, holding us in that space where we're going to grow and we're going to develop and we're going to work on ourselves so that we can become, quote unquote, adults. We can learn to walk on our own. We don't need to be carried. We need to be carried out. We were like babies coming out of Egypt. We didn't know how to walk. We didn't know how to be, right? So we come into the desert. We start to learn, okay, I'm now going to, at the other end of this desert experience, I'm going to be put into the land of Israel. I'm going to be born into that land of Israel. And that's where I'm going to have to walk on my own. I got to transition from baby to walking on my own, and I have to figure out how to do that. This is the incubator. This is the pregnancy, so to speak. This is the place where I'm going to learn how to walk on my own, so that I'm going to earn who I am. I'm going to earn who I am. And at the end of the day, it's really about our effort. How much effort are we putting in? Because the result isn't up to us, like whether we're successful or not, whether we know the Torah or not. It's up to God. And it's interesting because there's a medrash that says when Moses was at Sinai and he learnt the Torah from God, and then he forgot it, and then God gave it to him again, and then he forgot it, and he gave it again. Like, how much we actually hold on to is a gift. It's a gift. So hopefully we hold on to a lot of it, and hopefully we let it integrate into who we are. And let's see if I said everything I wanted to say. Yeah, I think I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to say. Last thought. So here we are. We've gone from Pesach to Shavuos. We're into this marrying God experience at Sinai, low mountain. And they say Torah is like water. Torah is like water, and it flows down, right? It doesn't go up, it flows down. And it flows down. So it flows down to things that are humble, lowly. In Mount Sinai, low mountain. Moses, most humble of all people. Water, the acquisition of Torah likened to water is achieved most by those who are most humble. Moses was the most humble, he had the most Torah. So keep going with that thought. So that's something to work on. And then this idea of the idea that the Torah says was like black fire written on white fire. That Torah is a fire. It's on fire. Are we on fire? Is this exciting to us? Is this driving us? Is this something we're passionate about? Is this something that kind of gives us motivation every day? And I think that on some level, if we look for how to live our lives and how to understand things, that the overlay of Torah makes the world so rich, and it makes it so meaningful that we have a role to play and we have something to do, every single one of us. And every single one of us is part of the Jewish people, and every single one of us individually. We talked last week about sand and stars, like as a collective, like the sand, we have a mission, and as an individual, like stars, we have a mission. And I think it's the same thing here, like as the unity of the Ish Echad V'Lev Echad, that we were like one people because we were all so united as a people, but we were also full and whole as an individual. And that this receptacle that we are trying to be, so that we can receive the divine wisdom, so that we can absorb it and then continue to shine it out into the world. So my blessing to all of us is that we just continue on the path, continue working on ourselves, be kind to ourselves, be compassionate to ourselves and others, give each other a wide berth, give ourselves a wide berth. And I wish you all a good week and a Chag Sameach, and next week we'll be back on track for the Torah portion.